A swirl of dust kicked across the parched earth when the casket lid creaked open. Thomas Callahan, a rancher fallen on hard times, had taken on a grim job. He was paid in gold to dig a grave for a mysterious woman the town believed to be dead. But the moment he raised his shovel, a gasp erupted from those pale lips. Her eyes fluttered open, and his world changed in an instant. Little did he know this single act of compassion would plunge him into a fiery storm of deception, greed, and dangerous secrets that stretched far beyond the dusty plains. Thomas Callahan's life had once been simple. He was raised on the sprawling prairies of the Arizona Territory, an only child who knew nothing beyond the smell of horsehair, the unrelenting desert sun, and the chore of mending fences around his family's ranch. Back then, the land was lush enough for cattle to graze, and the fortunes of the Callahan homestead seemed secure. But nature, with its capricious mood swings, showed no mercy in the years that followed. Droughts scorched the earth, heavy winds battered fences, raiders stole livestock. By the time Thomas inherited the ranch from his late parents, he was fighting a losing battle. Still, Thomas was determined. Each morning before dawn, he saddled his buckskin mare, Tumbleweed, riding across the property, counting head of cattle. The day's labor always ended with dusty boots and sore muscles, but never with enough profit to keep the bank from breathing down his neck. His land was heavily mortgaged bills stacked high on the small dining table, and his once proud herd was now a shadow of the ranch's glory days. Even the well near the barn had begun to cough up more mud than water. Every night, Thomas collapsed onto his bunk, praying for a miracle that never came. Yet necessity gives birth to desperation, and it was in one of these desperate hours that a strange proposition landed at Thomas's door. One sultry evening, as the sun sank into a crimson horizon, a black-coated stranger rapped on the weather-beaten door of the Callahan ranch house. He introduced himself as Cyrus Beaumont, an unusually refined figure with polished boots and a silver pocket watch. A faint smell of cigar smoke clung to him. Those piercing dark eyes and the confident tilt of his jaw told Thomas this was no ordinary traveler. Cyrus claimed he represented certain wealthy men in town who needed a special service. He never specified exactly who his associates were, but implied their ranks included important folks, bankers, local magnates, and even the occasional politician. All men with enough clout to pay handsomely for a favor. Thomas listened in uneasy silence as Cyrus explained the job. There was a body to be buried. A woman who had died under unfortunate circumstances. No details, no questions. Just dig the grave in a secluded gulch beneath the cottonwoods. Say no prayers, and keep it as far away from the main cemetery as possible. No one, Cyrus said, should know her final resting place, and no one need question what went wrong. The instructions were grim, but the payment promised was impossible to ignore. 50 gold coins, enough to keep the bank from shuttering the ranch. Enough, perhaps, for him to buy feed to save his starving cattle through the next drought. Enough to survive. To bury the dead was not in itself shocking work. In these rugged parts of the West, life was cheap and tragedy was common. Folks often paid to have bodies buried swiftly, especially if the circumstances of death were controversial or the identity of the deceased was suspect. But there was something about the hush-hush nature of it all that made Thomas's skin crawl. The sum was unnaturally large for such a menial task. "We can't show her face in a public cemetery," Cyrus had murmured. "She's connected to the wrong people." My employers want no publicity, no risk. Though the alarm bells rang in Thomas's head, he looked at the battered stable walls, the near-dry well and the exhausted faces of his ranch hands, who hadn't received wages in 2 weeks. He felt his father's legacy slipping through his fingers every day. So he gave Cyrus his word. He would bury the woman, no questions asked. In return, he demanded half the payment up front. Cyrus, smirking, agreed. The flash of gold in the man's hands took Thomas's breath away. For a moment he was almost certain he had just made a deal with the devil. 2 days later, a small, nondescript wagon rolled up the rocky path to Thomas's ranch at dawn. Inside the wagon was a pine coffin, unmarked, roughly nailed shut. Leading the wagon was a tight-lipped driver, a bearded man in a black vest who gave no name and uttered no more than a handful of words. "She's in the box. No one sees." Upon verifying the coffin with a sideways glance, Thomas noticed a doctor's certificate pinned to the top, signed by a certain Dr. G.W. Merriman. Cause of death scrawled in near-illegible script. Fever, complicated by unknown ailment. The signature was abrupt and shaky. The details felt off, but Thomas forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He was no detective, and he had accepted the job. He had no desire to dig deeper. That same day, Thomas prepped his tools, loaded the coffin onto a rickety cart, and saddled Tumbleweed. He headed out to the remote gulch near Willow Creek, where thick cottonwoods offered enough shade to make a clandestine burial less likely to draw curious eyes. But as the sun climbed overhead and the dusty trail stretched, Thomas found his thoughts shifting from worry to downright dread. He'd worked as a ranch hand all his life, and burying dead livestock was one thing. Burying a human being under a veil of secrecy was quite another. Arriving at the gulch, he found it deserted as promised. The horses snorted in the midday heat, while the leaves of the cottonwood barely rustled in the still air. Thomas took his shovel and began to dig. The ground was firm, but not too rocky. Sweat beaded at his temples. Each spadeful of earth fell onto a neat pile at his side. The only sound was the rhythmic scrape of metal against dirt. He stopped only once to take a breather. Leaning on the shovel, he stared at the pine box resting in the back of the cart. A dark feeling pressed upon him, but he muttered under his breath, "You got to do this, Tom. You got to." He looked skyward, searching for some heavenly reassurance, but only found a relentless sun glaring back. Gathering his resolve, he continued to work until he had a grave about waist deep. Not too shallow, not too deep, just enough to keep prying eyes away. Thomas dragged the coffin off the cart, adrenaline pounding through him. He carefully pried the lid loose with the claw of his hammer. The instructions had been to ensure the coffin was placed inside the hole, hammered shut, and quickly covered. But there was a detail gnawing at Thomas. If the woman was truly dead, there was no harm in verifying. If there was foul play, he needed to at least be sure she was at peace. Or so he told himself as he forced the lid open. He was expecting the lifeless face of a stranger. He had even braced himself for something gruesome. But what he found turned his blood to ice. Inside the coffin lay a gaunt young woman, her dark hair, disheveled cheeks as pale as moonlight. A simple white shift was the only clothing she wore, and her hands were folded over her chest. Had he not been looking for it, he would have missed the subtle rise and fall of her chest. For indeed, she was breathing. Faint, shallow breaths. Her lips quivered. Before Thomas could think or even speak, the woman's eyes snapped open. They were an intense green, clouded by confusion, but alive, very much alive. He stumbled backward, his heart hammering. For a few paralyzing moments, the two stared at each other in shock. Then the woman began to cough, sputtering, as if starved of air, eyes darting around in panic. Realizing with horror that she had nearly been buried alive, she tried to scramble out of the coffin. Her weak arms trembled, and she nearly fell back. Thomas recovered enough to catch her. He lifted her fragile form, stepping away from the half-dug grave. Questions rolled over him in a flood. Who was this woman? Why had she been declared dead? And more importantly, who wanted her buried in secret? He recalled Cyrus's cryptic words. No one else must know. My employers want no publicity. A swirl of anger and terror mingled in Thomas's chest. Had Cyrus and his employers tried to kill this woman? Or did they genuinely believe she was dead? He wasn't naive. He knew criminals roamed the territory and conspiracies brewed behind polished doors. But to stoop to this level, burying a live woman. Still trembling, the woman gazed at Thomas with tearful confusion. Where am I? She croaked, her voice so faint he had to lean in to hear. Who are you, my name? Name's Thomas Callahan, he stammered. I was hired to bury you. Good God in heaven, I thought you were dead. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Panic welled in her eyes, as though she feared Thomas might truly finish what he'd started. He eased her down on a patch of shade, retrieving a small canteen of water from his saddlebag. She drank greedily, coughing at the stale but life-saving liquid. He realized she was delirious, starved, dehydrated. She must have been unconscious for at least a day or two. Sitting there in the dust, the two of them shared a moment of mute astonishment. Thomas noticed a faint bruise on the woman's temple and welts around her wrists, as if she had been bound. The more he saw, the more outraged he became. He did his best to calm her. You're safe now, he said, hoping it was the truth. I won't let anyone harm you. Thomas knew he had two options. The first was to finish the job as instructed, an unthinkable option, now that he realized she was alive. The second was to take her somewhere safe, nurse her back to health, and risk the wrath of whoever orchestrated this scheme. It was hardly a choice at all. He couldn't bury a living soul, not for all the gold in the Arizona territory. Cautiously, he helped her into the back of the cart, settling her on some folded blankets. Hold on, he said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. I'll take you to my ranch. She nodded weakly, tears in her eyes, perhaps grateful for a moment of kindness. But as Thomas guided Tumbleweed out of the gulch, he felt the full weight of what he'd done pressing on him. He'd accepted blood money. He was now defying powerful, mysterious forces. If Cyrus found out the woman was still alive, Thomas wouldn't just lose the ranch. He might lose his life. The journey back was nerve-wracking. Every crunch of gravel, every distant silhouette on the horizon made him flinch. He glanced over his shoulder at the woman who drifted in and out of consciousness. She needed a doctor immediately, but could Thomas risk a local physician? Dr. Hooper in the nearest town of Red Bluff was a decent man, but word traveled fast. And if Dr. Hooper got wind that a dead woman was very much alive, rumors would swirl. Cyrus and his associates would hear of it soon enough. For now, Thomas resolved to hide her in his ranch house until she recovered. If discovered, he could claim ignorance or spin some lie. He didn't know yet. He just knew she needed help. When they arrived, his ranch hands, Eduardo, Rufus, and Big John, looked askance at him as he carried the frail woman inside. He barked an order for them to tend the horses and say nothing. They were loyal men, grateful for Thomas's efforts to keep them employed despite the ranch's failing finances. The trio exchanged anxious glances, but obeyed without a word. Even so, worry gnawed at Thomas. The more people who saw her, the bigger the risk of the secret slipping out. In the small bedroom that had once belonged to his mother, Thomas laid the woman on a clean bed. He fed her spoonfuls of warm broth and sips of water through the night. Her fever rose and fell in waves. She thrashed, delirious, but at least she was breathing. Thomas was no medical expert, but he'd nursed livestock enough to know the basic steps: hydration, rest, treat the fever with cool cloths and herbal remedies. He found a leftover remedy from an old traveling doctor, a mixture of laudanum and some pungent herbs. It might have eased her pain, though it made her sleep restlessly, mumbling incoherent words about betrayal, about shadowy figures, about a name, Beaumont. That name jolted Thomas upright. Cyrus Beaumont had hired him. Could this woman be directly tied to him? Was she a relative, a lover, or someone Cyrus had tried to silence? Come morning, the woman's color was better, though she remained extremely weak. Thomas knelt beside her, offering her another sip of water. She met his gaze, confusion still clouding her face, though she seemed less frightened of him now. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. She swallowed hard. "Eliza," she replied in a whisper, then closed her eyes as though the effort of speaking was exhausting. Eliza Thomas repeated, "Do you have a family name?" "Where are you from?" She shook her head feebly. I don't remember," she stammered, voice trembling. "My head, it hurts." He noticed again the bruise on her temple. Amnesia was not unheard of after a head injury, and trauma can play cruel tricks on the mind. Gently, he asked, "Did Cyrus Beaumont do this to you?" At that name, her features tensed with fear. She seemed to search her mind, but no clear answer formed on her lips. "Saw him," she managed. "I saw him with a letter, no, gold. There were men. They were arguing. Then everything went dark." Thomas lightly grasped her hand, feeling the clammy skin. "Rest now. Don't force it." He worried that pressing her too hard would only worsen her fragile condition. With gentle care, he dabbed her forehead with a cool cloth. He had no illusions this was a woman in mortal danger, and her best defense might lie in the very memory she couldn't fully recall. That day, Thomas stayed by her side, providing small comforts and nursing her. When evening fell, he gathered Eduardo and Big John in the barn, away from the main house. In hushed tones, he explained enough for them to understand the woman was meant to be buried alive, and powerful people were involved. He pleaded with them to keep silent. Both men swore they would out of loyalty and a certain moral outrage at the idea of burying a living person. But the question of how long they could keep her presence a secret loomed unspoken in the hay-scented air. Days passed. Eliza's strength gradually returned, though her memory remained splintered. Sometimes she recalled a snippet of conversation or a face, but nothing substantial. Thomas gleaned that Cyrus was part of some scheme involving a land sale, and Eliza had perhaps discovered damning evidence. But the threads of memory were too tangled for her to form a coherent narrative. One moment she seemed on the verge of a revelation. The next, she was lost in a fog of confusion. Meanwhile, Thomas's anxiety skyrocketed. He'd used half the gold from Cyrus to pay off pressing debts at the bank, buying him a few weeks of breathing room. The remainder he'd used for feed and supplies. But with no body buried, Cyrus would be back soon, demanding answers or the return of his gold. In the lonely expanse of the ranch, Thomas listened for hoofbeats every night, expecting an unwelcome visitor. He wasn't wrong. On the 8th day after Eliza's resurrection, a solitary rider appeared at dusk. Thomas spotted the silhouette from the front porch, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black frock coat. It was Cyrus Beaumont himself, gliding across the plain on a midnight stallion. Thomas's stomach sank. He glanced around his ranch. Hands were out mending fences, and Eliza was resting in the house. He had to protect her. Quietly, he slipped inside to warn her. But she was asleep, her labored breathing still far from well. For a second, he considered dragging her out to the barn to hide. But there was no time. Cyrus was already knocking, heart pounding. Thomas swallowed his fear and opened the door. Cyrus stood there, immaculate as ever, a hint of dust on his boots, but an oily smirk on his lips. "Greetings," he said, in that genteel tone that felt too smooth for a land as harsh as this. "I trust the arrangement is complete." Thomas fought to keep his voice steady. "Burial took place 4 days ago." Cyrus nodded, scanning Thomas's face. "I have men who keep an eye on matters such as these. I don't like surprises." The threat was unspoken but clear. "Is the site well out of sight?" Thomas forced a nod. "Buried her near Willow Creek, just like you said. No markers, no fuss." Cyrus's eyes flicked to the side, as though he expected to see something amiss. "Well?" "My employers appreciate your discretion. I'm certain you haven't breathed a word to anyone." "Of course not," Thomas said, struggling to maintain eye contact. He wondered if the perspiration on his brow was noticeable. "I do need the rest of the payment." The air seemed to tighten. Cyrus's smirk widened into a grin that showed too many teeth. "Indeed, about that. You've already received your advance, correct? My employer wants to confirm the job is final." He stepped closer, leaning in. "These things can't be undone, you understand." Thomas's pulse thundered. He forced a confident posture. "You can ride out and see for yourself," he said, deliberately vague. "Or do you think she might climb out of the grave?" He tried to chuckle, but it came out forced. Cyrus stared at him a long moment. "I suppose that's true. However, the remainder of your fee requires certain assurances. If it's all the same to you, I'll wait on paying the rest. Just to ensure there are no miraculous resurrections. After a while, when I'm fully confident I'll see that you're compensated. I suggest you don't chase me for it." He patted Thomas's shoulder, as if soothing a jumpy horse. "I'm sure you understand." With that, he stepped back, dipped his hat, and left. Thomas watched him depart, heart still hammering. For now, it seemed Cyrus didn't suspect anything. But the man's cunning aura suggested that any slip-up would be discovered, and with no shortage of cutthroats on Cyrus's payroll, the slightest whiff of betrayal could prove fatal. Inside the house, Eliza stirred, awakened by the heated conversation. She rubbed her temples as Thomas kneeled beside her. "Who was that?" she asked. "Cyrus Beaumont," he replied, voice hushed. "You remembered him right?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I'm the reason you're in danger. I can't remember enough to help you." Thomas clasped her hand gently. "Don't blame yourself. I couldn't have buried you." Her eyes glistened at the sincerity in his voice. "We'll figure this out together." Over the following days, Eliza grew strong enough to walk around the ranch house with the support of a makeshift cane. She observed the dusty photographs of Thomas's parents, the simple furniture, the fraying rugs. When her appetite returned, she prepared biscuits and bacon alongside Thomas in the kitchen, a shared moment of fleeting normalcy. But the unspoken tension lay thick. They both knew a time would come when Cyrus or his men might pay an unexpected visit, and they'd better have a plan. As Eliza's mind cleared, fragments of her memory returned in flashes. She told Thomas about a safe deposit box in the local bank in Red Bluff. A letter sealed with wax that she was told to protect at all costs. But whose letter was it, and what did it contain? She recalled hearing the name Dr. G.W. Merriman, the same name on the fraudulent death certificate. It seemed Dr. Merriman had declared her dead, possibly under pressure from Cyrus's associates. If so, the good doctor might be the key to unraveling the conspiracy. Yet risk lurked in every corner. The bank in Red Bluff was run by men who likely answered to the same powerful circles that employed Cyrus. If Eliza showed up alive, it would blow the lid on the entire scheme. They needed a plan that wouldn't alert the wrong people. Thomas realized that if there was a safe deposit box, it might be under her name, and that name she still couldn't fully recall. She had only the first name, Eliza, and scattered glimpses of her past. Thomas asked around, discreetly claiming to search for a missing cousin. But the local townsfolk in Red Bluff didn't recall anyone named Eliza who fit her description. No travelers by that name had recently arrived by stagecoach, and no local families matched her features. It was a dead end. Meanwhile, time ticked away. Eventually, the tension became intolerable. Thomas and Eliza decided to risk approaching Dr. Hooper, the local physician in Red Bluff, at night time. Dr. Hooper was known to be trustworthy, and hopefully he hadn't been bought by Cyrus's shady network. Under cover of darkness, they hitched a small buggy with Eliza cloaked to hide her features. With each mile on the dusty road, Thomas felt an invisible clock ticking down to their exposure. They found Dr. Hooper at home behind his modest clinic. The doctor, an older gentleman with a kindly face and tired eyes, was startled to see Thomas at such a late hour, accompanied by a hooded figure. But his surprise turned to alarm when he recognized a frightened woman who was supposed to be dead and buried. Eliza pleaded with him, voice trembling. "You must believe me. Someone tried to kill me. They told everyone I was dead, including you. Or maybe Dr. Merriman did. I need your help." Dr. Hooper, though bewildered, ushered them inside. He quickly examined Eliza, confirming that though she was malnourished and still nursing a head injury, she was on the mend. I don't understand," he confessed, rubbing his brow. "Dr. Merriman's name was on that certificate. He's a traveling physician I've met only once at a conference in Tucson. But for him to declare a living woman dead, that's horrifying. Where is Dr. Merriman now?" Thomas shrugged. Likely in the employ of Cyrus Beaumont, or at least in league with him. "We need to know why." Dr. Hooper paced the floor, occasionally glancing at Eliza with pity. "It's possible Merriman forged that certificate under duress. Or maybe he's on the take. Either way, we have to be careful." He then offered a suggestion that piqued Thomas's interest. "Judge Roy Bean is in town for a circuit hearing. He's a peculiar man, but known for despising corruption. If we can bring this matter to his attention discreetly, he might help. But you'd need evidence, something solid to prove an attempted murder conspiracy." Eliza's eyes lit with hope. "The safe deposit box," she said. "There might be documents or a letter that incriminates Cyrus, but I can't recall which bank or under what name it's stored." Dr. Hooper thought for a moment. "There are 2 banks in Red Bluff. One is the Wells Fargo office, the other is the Friedman and Hollister Bank. Let me think, Friedman and Hollister might be less influenced by Beaumont's circle. If you stored something that might be the place, especially if secrecy was paramount." They devised a plan. Dr. Hooper would subtly inquire at Friedman and Hollister about safe deposit boxes belonging to someone named Eliza. He'd claim it was on behalf of a patient who lost her memory. This was a risky gambit, but if they found the right box, it might confirm Eliza's identity and hold crucial evidence. The next day, Dr. Hooper returned with the note scrawled in shaky handwriting. "One deposit box registered under the name Eliza Harrington." The bank manager had been tight-lipped, but Dr. Hooper's official position in the town had allowed him some leeway. The deposit box required the holder's signature and a personal identification to open. But Dr. Hooper believed if Eliza could convincingly match her signature, they might gain access. That name, Eliza Harrington, sparked a new memory in the young woman's mind. She recalled a fleeting image of an old trunk with the initials E.H. on it. Her father's trunk. Scenes of a dusty ranch in Texas, a father who taught her to ride. Then the memory vanished again, leaving her with tears of frustration. Still, Eliza Harrington felt like a missing puzzle piece slipping into place. They decided to strike quickly, hoping Cyrus's men wouldn't get wind of it. Under Dr. Hooper's guidance, Eliza disguised herself. She wore a conservative dress and a bonnet that concealed much of her face. Thomas accompanied her, disguised with a broad-brimmed hat pulled low. They entered Friedman and Hollister Bank at midday, blending with the normal bustle. At the counter, the bank clerk eyed them suspiciously. But Dr. Hooper introduced Eliza as a patient who had recently survived a terrible accident and was there to access her deposit box. The clerk asked for identification. Eliza, gripping the pen nervously, signed her name. Eliza Harrington. The moment she completed her signature, a glimmer of recognition crossed the clerk's face. He produced a ledger, found the matching signature from the box's original registration, and nodded. "That'll do," he said. The clerk led them to a small private booth where the deposit boxes were kept. He slid open a metal drawer and handed over a wooden box, small and unassuming, to Eliza. Then, leaving them alone to examine the contents, he closed the door. Thomas waited, heart pounding. Eliza opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside they found a bundle of letters, tied together with a thin ribbon, plus a black leather notebook. One letter bore a black wax seal, stamped with the crest of a rearing stallion, a symbol neither recognized. Another letter read, "To be delivered to Mr. Wyatt Earp, Dodge City, upon my death." The name Wyatt Earp was famous enough across the West. He was a storied lawman. Why would Eliza have a letter meant for him? Then they found a smaller envelope, unsealed, containing documents that outlined a land deed. Thomas's eyes widened. The deed was for a large parcel near the Arizona-Texas border, and at the bottom an unmistakable signature, Cyrus Beaumont. An attached note in Eliza's handwriting read, "Proof of Beaumont's scheme to seize the Harrington Ranch. Must get this to the authorities." It was all coming into focus. Cyrus must have discovered that Eliza had incriminating evidence of his attempt to fraudulently claim the Harrington property. With her out of the picture declared dead, he could finalize the scheme unopposed. The letter to Wyatt Earp might have been a failsafe or a plea for legal intervention. Earp had a reputation in those days for fearlessly chasing down outlaws and crooked land barons. As Eliza flipped through the pages of the notebook, her memories seemed to sharpen. Tears welled up as she saw entries describing her father's failing health, her struggle to maintain their ranch, and her growing suspicions about Cyrus Beaumont. The final entries stopped abruptly likely when Cyrus put his plan into motion. They stared at each other, the significance of this evidence sinking in. If they could get this to a judge like Roy Bean, or if they managed to contact Wyatt Earp, Cyrus's entire conspiracy could be exposed. But it would also paint a bullseye on Eliza's back. Cyrus and his powerful associates wouldn't hesitate to silence her again. Their luck nearly ran out the moment they stepped from the private booth. At the far side of the bank, Thomas spotted a stoic figure with a black hat, one of Cyrus's henchmen named Jack Hobbs. He recognized Jack from a brief glance at the ranch weeks ago. Jack was apparently conducting some business, but his eyes flicked in their direction. Thomas quickly turned away, guiding Eliza behind a large man in line, hoping to remain unseen. They whispered in panic to Dr. Hooper, who calmly escorted them to the side exit. "Keep moving," he muttered. "Don't run, don't draw attention." Outside, they hurried to their buggy. They kept their heads down, hearts pounding. Only once they were on the main road heading away from town did Thomas risk a glance behind. No sign of pursuit yet, but it was only a matter of time. That night at the ranch, Thomas and Eliza pored over the documents. A plan took shape. Gather these papers, find a trustworthy lawman or judge and present them. If that proved impossible, maybe the letter to Wyatt Earp could be mailed or carried by a messenger. But traveling to Dodge City or even to the county seat where Roy Bean might hold court was dangerous. Cyrus would be watching for them. Time was against them. Eliza could sense it, and so could Thomas. The next day they woke to find a note pinned to the ranch's main gate. "We hear you have a secret. Surrender it or pay the price." No signature, no name, just a nail hammered through the note into the wood. Thomas's blood ran cold. Cyrus suspected something. Fear twisted into resolve. Thomas refused to stand by, while a criminal like Cyrus trampled their lives. He confided in his ranch hands, who agreed to defend the property if trouble came. They owed Thomas their loyalty, but they were also outraged by the injustice inflicted on Eliza. Big John barricaded the windows in the main house. Eduardo scouted vantage points from the barn loft. Rufus prepared rifles and ammunition. Their small group might stand a chance if attacked, but they all knew bullets alone wouldn't solve the bigger threat. They needed the law on their side. Fortune offered one lifeline. Judge Roy Bean was rumored to still be in Red Bluff for another day. Dr. Hooper volunteered to speak to him on Thomas's behalf, quietly presenting the evidence of Cyrus's land grab. If Judge Bean was half the legend, folks claimed he wouldn't stand for an attempted murder disguised as a burial. They arranged a meeting that night in secret at Dr. Hooper's clinic. Eliza decided she had to attend her testimony, plus the documents might be enough to spur Bean into immediate action. Thomas agreed, though he fretted about her safety. Under the cover of darkness, they traveled once more to Red Bluff, avoiding the main roads when possible. But as they neared the clinic, gunfire split the quiet night. Sparks lit up the darkness like fireflies. A bullet whizzed past the buggy, lodging itself in a nearby wooden post. Another cracked the air above their heads. Thomas jerked the reins, and the horse whinnied in alarm. From the corner of his eye, he saw two riders brandishing rifles, Cyrus's men. "Ride," Thomas shouted. The buggy wheels rattled along the rough terrain. Eliza clung to him, clutching the deposit box. More shots rang out, one of them shattering the buggy's wheel. The vehicle lurched violently, flinging them onto the ground. Thomas's shoulder hit a rock, pain exploding through him. Despite the agony, he scrambled to shield Eliza, who was shaken but unhurt. Gunmen closed in, brandishing torches that cast flickering shadows on the dusty streets. Townsfolk scattered, retreating into alleys. It was obvious the pair couldn't outrun mounted pursuers on foot. They needed cover, and they needed it fast. Thomas spotted Dr. Hooper waving frantically from the clinic doorway, beckoning them inside. With adrenaline surging, Thomas hoisted Eliza to her feet. They sprinted the short-distance bullets, chipping the wooden sign overhead. The moment they slipped through the door, Dr. Hooper slammed it shut, bolting it. Upstairs quickly, he urged. They dashed up the narrow stairs, hearts thudding. Judge Roy Bean, a stout man with a bushy mustache and a disarming calmness, stood in the hallway. He raised an eyebrow at the commotion, but didn't flinch when bullets hammered the door below. "I reckon you folks have a story," he drawled. Eliza pressed the deposit box into his hands. Her voice shook. "Evidence. Cyrus Beaumont. Tried to bury me alive. He's after my father's land." That was all she managed, before the walls reverberated with the impact of a door being kicked in below. A tense hush fell over the group as they heard heavy footsteps in the clinic's ground floor. Cyrus's men had forced entry. Dr. Hooper's terrified assistant shrieked, her voice echoing, "Stay away." Then a muffled crash, likely the men shoving furniture aside in search of Thomas Eliza and the judge. Judge Bean scanned the documents quickly. He recognized the forged death certificate, the land deed, and the letter to Wyatt Earp. "Good Lord," he muttered, mouth set in a grim line. "This is enough to bring charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud. By the powers vested in me, I can call for arrests right now." Thomas swallowed hard, drawing his revolver. "We'll need more than paperwork to stop these men." Bean nodded. "Dr. Hooper is there. Another way out." "Back window leads to the roof of the next building," said the doctor. "But it's a risky drop." Below, the men barked curses. Another door splintered. Shots rang out, and fear clenched Thomas's gut. They would torch the place if necessary. Judge Bean took a deep breath. "I'll do my duty. You folks get out of here. I'll hold them off." Before Thomas or Eliza could protest, Bean strode to the top of the staircase. He called down, voice booming with authority. "I am Judge Roy Bean, holding court under the laws of the United States of America. Lay down your arms or I'll see you tried for assault on an officer of the court." A startled hush ensued, broken by the mocking laughter of a man with a familiar drawl, Cyrus Beaumont. "Judge Bean, is that you?" he sneered. "You're meddling in affairs that don't concern you. Hand over the woman and her accomplice, and we can settle this quietly." Bean's mustache twitched. "Quietly, is it? After your men shot up the street and kicked in a physician's door? I think not. Surrender now." Thomas risked a glance down the stairs. He saw Cyrus flanked by 2 henchman rifles aimed upwards. But the presence of the judge seemed to cause them a moment's hesitation. Cyrus, however, recovered quickly. "I'm afraid you overestimate your reach, Judge," he said. "Let us pass, or we'll be forced to remove you from our path." Bean gripped the banister, unwavering. "Son, you even twitch that rifle in my direction. You'll hang for it come morning. Now I'll give you this one warning. Drop your guns." Tension crackled in the air. The 2 henchmen exchanged uncertain looks, unsure how far their boss wanted to push a direct confrontation with a federal judge. Cyrus, however, exuded a cunning confidence. Judge Bean, my associates are powerful men. They'll see that this inconvenience is handled. Last chance, hand them over." Thomas saw Bean's jaw clench. The judge had no illusions about his precarious position. The West was lawless enough that a judge could be gunned down and justice might never come for the killers. Still, he refused to yield. Eliza gently tugged Thomas's arm. She whispered, "We can't let Bean get a shot defending us. Let's find the back way out. We'll expose Cyrus later with the judge's help." Thomas nodded. They heard Dr. Hooper fumbling with a window latch in the back room. The plan was to escape onto the adjacent rooftop. Even if it meant a long drop, it was better than a certain firefight with lethal odds. Before they left, Eliza gave the deposit box to the judge, save for the essential letter addressed to Wyatt Earp. "If anything happens to us, see this evidence to the proper authorities," she said. Bean nodded gravely, tucking the items into a leather satchel. No sooner had they turned to go than the air erupted with gunfire. Cyrus's men, no longer intimidated, opened fire up the stairwell. Chips of wood flew, and one bullet grazed Bean's arm, drawing blood. He staggered, but didn't fall, returning fire with a pistol. Dr. Hooper gasped, ducking behind a door frame. Thomas shielded Eliza, adrenaline roaring through his veins. More bullets whizzed overhead. A lamp was knocked over in the chaos flame, spilling onto the floorboards. With hearts pounding, Thomas and Eliza lunged toward the back window. Dr. Hooper helped them pry it open. Smoke rose as small flames licked at the fallen lamp oil. They could smell burning wood. Judge Bean, cursing under his breath, fired again, his shot catching one of the henchmen in the leg. The man dropped with a howl. Cyrus hissed orders to the other gunman, barking, "Get that judge! Shoot him down if you must!" Thomas boosted Eliza onto the sill. She winced at the dizzying height. There was a roof a few feet away. She took a breath and leapt, landing hard, but Dr. Hooper steadied her from behind. Thomas followed, nearly slipping on loose shingles, but managing to keep his balance. They scrambled across the rooftop, ignoring the shouts and gunfire below. From the corner of his eye, Thomas saw the glow of flames intensifying in the clinic's upper window. The building might burn down entirely. Once across the roof, they clambered down a rickety ladder into a dark alley. Distant shouts signaled the approach of townsfolk, or possibly the sheriff, but it was too risky to wait. They found a pair of horses tied behind a nearby stable. With everything at stake, they stole the horses. In the confusion, no one was watching. By the time they galloped out of Red Bluff, the night sky was lit with an eerie orange glow from the burning clinic. The couple raced through the countryside under the moonlight. They didn't stop until their mounts were exhausted lungs heaving. Only then did they pause by a dry ravine, hearts still pounding in their chests. Eliza clung to Thomas, tears flowing freely. "Judge Bean," she murmured, voice tight with guilt and fear. "Is he alive?" Thomas pressed a shaky hand over hers. "He's a tough old cuss. I hope he made it out. He's got your evidence, maybe enough to finally bring Cyrus to justice." They spent the night huddled behind a rock outcrop, taking turns keeping watch. Neither slept much, haunted by the knowledge that Cyrus's men might still be on their trail. At sunrise, they headed back to Thomas's ranch, hearts heavy. When they arrived, they found devastation. Fences trampled the barn door, smashed in livestock, scattered or stolen. In the yard, Big John lay battered, nursing a broken arm. Rufus and Eduardo emerged from the ruined barn, bruised but alive. "They came right after you left." Big John rasped, leaning on Eduardo. "We tried to hold them off. They were looking for you and the woman. They left a message, said next time they'll do worse." Thomas's fists clenched in silent rage. The last safe haven he knew ravaged. Eliza's eyes brimmed with tears. She blamed herself. But Thomas hushed her. They brought this on themselves. We'll get justice. The ranch hands shared news that a posse had formed in town, presumably called by Sheriff Walters, who was outraged by the gunfight at Dr. Hooper's clinic. Word was that Judge Bean survived wounded, but furious. He was summoning the sheriff, organizing a search for Cyrus and his men. The conspiracy was bursting into public view. Town chatter was ablaze with talk of an attempted murder, a burnt clinic, and a buried alive woman. The tide of public opinion might shift in their favor if they could stay alive long enough for the law to catch up. Thomas, Eliza, and the ranch hands spent the next day repairing what they could, burying the dead livestock and reinforcing the house. Late in the afternoon, a lone rider approached under a white cloth tied to a stick, a makeshift flag of truce. It was one of Cyrus's men, face etched with worry. "My employer wants a parley," he called from a distance. "Sunset at Willow Creek Gulch." The audacity enraged Thomas, but Eliza recognized a potential advantage. "Willow Creek is where I was almost buried alive," she said grimly. "It might be the only chance to end this without more bloodshed. Or it could be a trap." Still, Thomas agreed they had little choice. If they refused, Cyrus would keep attacking. Perhaps if they appeared with the evidence, they could force Cyrus to stand down until the sheriff arrived. So as the sun sank behind the desert hills, Thomas and Eliza rode out with only Rufus at their side, just enough muscle to watch their backs. The trio arrived to find Cyrus leaning against a cottonwood, flanked by 2 men with rifles. The half-dug grave from before still yawned in the ground like an accusation. Cyrus wore a mocking grin. "Thomas, you sure made a mess. You and the girl were supposed to be silent. But now half the territory knows I tried to bury her." He gestured to Eliza, his tone casual as a snake coiling to strike. "I can't let that slide." Thomas leveled a cold stare. "You have bigger problems than me. The law is on to you." Cyrus chuckled. "Law. In these parts, men like me make the law. Judge Bean is just an irritant. If you hand over any documents you stole, I might consider sparing your life. You could keep the ranch. No one has to die tonight." Eliza squared her shoulders. "I'm done hiding," she said, voice trembling with pent-up fury. "You tried to kill me to steal my father's land. I have proof. The judge has it too." A flicker of fear crossed Cyrus's eyes, quickly masked by anger. "So that old dog does live. Well, even a judge can be bought or silenced eventually. But you, Eliza, you're a thorn in my side that needs plucking." Rufus tightened his grip on his rifle. Thomas said quietly, "We're not handing her over. Not now, not ever." Cyrus's men raised their rifles. The desert air hummed with tension, as if the entire world held its breath. Then, as if on cue, the thunder of hooves and the shout of men echoed through the gulch. Sheriff Walters, flanked by 6 armed deputies, galloped into view. Judge Roy Bean was with them, arm bandaged, but upright and resolute. The ring of lawmen encircled the clearing. "That's enough," roared Walters. "Drop your weapons. In the name of the law." Cyrus's men, seeing themselves outnumbered, hesitated. Cyrus, eyes wild, seemed ready to fight anyway. But a sharp look from Judge Bean sealed his fate. "You'll face charges of attempted murder, fraud, arson, and more if you resist. Surrender." With a trembling snarl, Cyrus glanced at Eliza one last time. then let his pistol clatter to the rocky ground. His henchmen followed suit. As deputies seized them, Cyrus spat at the dust. "You'll regret this," he hissed at Thomas, but the threat rang hollow with the law's muzzle pressed to his back. After years of operating in the shadows, Cyrus Beaumont's downfall was swift. Judge Bean wasted no time convening a preliminary hearing. The deposit box documents laid out Cyrus's elaborate scheme to fraudulently claim the Harrington ranch and forcibly remove Eliza as an heir. Witness testimonies. Thomas's Eliza's Dr. Hoopers painted a damning picture of Cyrus's willingness to murder for profit. Even Dr. Merriman, found hiding in a seedy hotel, confessed under pressure that he'd been paid to sign a fake death certificate. For Eliza, the hearing was cathartic. She stood before the judge retelling the harrowing tale of her kidnapping near fatal injury and brush with a living grave. Each word was a painful exhumation of trauma, but also a triumph of truth over villainy. Thomas stood beside her, offering silent support. Sheriff Walters personally led Cyrus, shackled and scowling, into the courtroom. Judge Bean read the charges. A jury of townsfolk needed barely an hour to deliberate. The verdict: guilty on all counts. The sentence ranged from a lengthy prison term to possible hanging, depending on higher courts' rulings. Either way, Cyrus's power was broken. In the weeks after the trial, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Eliza reclaimed her rightful inheritance, her father's ranch, though it lay neglected and far to the east. She contemplated traveling there to rebuild. Thomas, in turn, used some of the recovered gold to pay off the last of his debts. The ranch hands got their well-deserved wages, and the fences were soon repaired. Through the swirling dust of their troubles, a bond had formed between Thomas and Eliza that neither had anticipated. Their shared adversity, the closeness of near-death experiences, had forged a partnership deeper than simple gratitude. One afternoon, as they walked the perimeter of Thomas's ranch, Eliza paused under a mesquite tree, looking out over the grazing cattle. "You saved my life," she said. "More than once." Thomas took her hand. "You brought meaning back to mine. I was ready to do anything, bury a stranger for gold, just to keep this land. But now, everything's changed." She offered a gentle smile, tears in her eyes. "I want to rebuild my father's ranch, keep his memory alive. It's what he would have wanted. But I don't want to do it alone." Her gaze locked with his, shy but hopeful. A warm breeze stirred the grass. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "I'll stand by you, Eliza Harrington, if you'll have me." The moon rose over the quiet ranch as they both looked toward an uncertain but shared future. And though the West remained a land of harsh trials and hidden dangers, they had faced the worst of it hand in hand. Nothing, not even the swirling dust storms or the bandits' guns, would ever bury them again. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster ride through the Arizona frontier. A story of buried secrets, desperate bargains, and the power of a single act of compassion. We watched a struggling rancher risk everything to save a stranger's life, only to uncover a conspiracy that spanned the dusty trails and hidden ledges of a lawless land. In the end, justice won out, but not without scars and heartbreak. Yet from those trials, hope bloomed a promise of new beginnings and a future forged by courage and loyalty. If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue exploring the wild corners of history and crafting stories brimming with adventure. Share this with friends who crave thrilling tales and stay tuned for even more gripping dramas from the untamed West.